"I am your lost daughter," said the cleaning lady to the Millionaire CEO during an important meeting in front of everyone. The Millionaire CEO laughed, but the pendant she showed left him speechless. Emily Parker pushed her cleaning cart down the marble hallway of the 42nd floor, her worn sneakers making barely a whisper against the polished stone. At 5:47 a.m., the Harrington Corporation building was almost empty, just the way she preferred it. Security guards nodded without really seeing her. Executives who arrived early stepped around her like she was part of the furniture. After 2 years of this routine, Emily had mastered the art of being invisible, but she saw everything. She'd memorized every executive's schedule, knew which offices held the most secrets, and had learned to read body language like a foreign language. The janitor's uniform was her camouflage, the cleaning supplies her cover story. Nobody questioned why the cleaning lady needed to empty trash cans so thoroughly, or why she took extra time dusting certain desks. Emily paused outside the corner office, the one with Victoria Harrington, Vice President, etched in gold lettering. Through the glass walls, she watched the woman who had destroyed her family 30 years ago. Though Victoria had no idea Emily knew the truth, Victoria sat behind her mahogany desk, perfectly coiffed even at this ungodly hour, speaking in hushed tones to Thomas Blake, the company's financial advisor. Emily had seen them together often, always when they thought no one was watching, always with the same conspiratorial intimacy that made her skin crawl. "The dosage needs to increase," Victoria was saying, her voice carrying just enough for Emily to catch fragments. "He's becoming resistant." Emily's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd suspected for months that Victoria was slowly poisoning William Harrington, her own husband, the man who had no idea his beloved wife was the same woman who'd orchestrated his first wife's death and stolen his baby daughter 3 decades ago. The baby daughter who was now mopping floors 20 feet away. Emily forced herself to keep moving, pushing the cart toward the executive bathroom. She'd learned patience during her 12-year search for the truth, growing up on a Kansas farm with adoptive parents who'd loved her, but could never fill the inexplicable void in her chest. She'd always known something was missing. The discovery of her adoption papers at 18 had sent her on a quest that led her through foster care records, private investigators, and finally to the heart of Manhattan's financial district. Finding out she was Emily Harrington, not Emily Parker, had nearly broken her. Learning that her birth mother Charlotte had been murdered, and she herself had been stolen and sold like a commodity, had rebuilt her into something harder, more determined. "Morning, Emily." The gentle voice made Emily jump. Olivia Harrington stood in the hallway, designer purse slung over her shoulder, looking nothing like the corporate sharks that usually prowled these floors. At 23, Victoria's adopted daughter had her father's kind eyes and none of her mother's calculated coldness. "Oh, hi, Miss Harrington." Emily managed to smile, the only genuine one she'd worn all week. Olivia was the exception to everything Emily had expected about this family, where Andrew, her 25-year-old brother, treated the help with practiced indifference. Olivia actually saw people. "I told you. Just call me Olivia. We've been having coffee in the break room for months now." Olivia's laugh was warm, unguarded. "Are you working late again? Or early?" "Early. I like the quiet," Emily resumed, mopping, hyper-aware of Victoria's office just yards away. "I get that. Sometimes I come in early just to think without all the chaos." Olivia hesitated, then stepped closer. "Hey, are you okay? You've seemed, tense lately." The concern in Olivia's voice nearly undid Emily. This young woman was her half-sister, blood of her blood, and had no idea she was showing kindness to family. Emily wondered what Olivia would say if she knew the woman who'd raised her was a murderer, that the sister she'd never met was scrubbing toilets 15 feet away. "Just tired. You know how it is." Emily kept her voice neutral, professional. "Well, don't work too hard. This place will still be dirty tomorrow." Olivia touched Emily's arm briefly, a gesture of genuine care that made Emily's throat tighten. "See you around." Emily watched her half-sister disappear into the elevator, probably heading to her junior marketing position, blissfully unaware that their father was being slowly killed by the woman who'd tucked her into bed every night for 20 years. The cleaning cart's wheels squeaked as Emily continued down the hall. Past Andrew's empty office, unlike his sister, he'd never once acknowledged Emily's existence, which actually made things easier. Andrew was Victoria's golden boy, heir apparent, probably complicit in ways he didn't even realize. But not Olivia. Emily had watched her carefully for 2 years, looking for signs of Victoria's poison in her adopted daughter. Instead, she'd found genuine kindness, the kind that reminded Emily of her adoptive mother back in Kansas. Margaret Parker had died of cancer when Emily was 25, taking with her the only unconditional love Emily had ever known, until Olivia started bringing her coffee and asking about her day. Emily's hand unconsciously went to her throat, where the broken heart pendant rested beneath her uniform shirt, half of a gold locket, jagged where it had been torn apart, with a tiny inscription, "My heart." She'd worn it every day since the Parkers gave it to her on her 16th birthday, the only link to her real identity they'd been able to preserve, somewhere in this building. William Harrington kept the other half. She'd seen him holding it sometimes, late at night when he thought he was alone in his office, staring at it like it contained the secrets of the universe, which, in a way, it did. The security camera in the corner blinked red, and Emily adjusted her position to stay in its blind spot, something she'd mapped out months ago. Every camera, every guard rotation, every security weakness. When the time came to reveal herself, she'd need every advantage she could get. Victoria's voice drifted out of her office again. "Sharper now. Can't wait much longer. The symptoms are barely noticeable, and if someone starts asking questions..." Thomas's response was too quiet to hear, but Victoria's laugh sent ice through Emily's veins. It was the sound a predator made when cornering prey. Emily gripped the mop handle tighter. Soon, she told herself. Very soon. The woman who'd stolen 30 years of her life would pay for every single day. But first, she had to save the father she'd never known from the wife who was slowly killing him. The elevator dinged, and Emily looked up to see William Harrington himself stepping out. Looking older than his 55 years, he moved with the careful gait of someone whose body was betraying him, though he probably attributed it to stress and age, rather than the digitalis Victoria was slipping into his heart medication. Their eyes met for just a moment, the daughter he believed was dead, and the father who didn't know she was alive. Emily felt the weight of 30 years of separation, of lies, of stolen family dinners and bedtime stories and birthday wishes. "Good morning," William said politely, the way he'd greet any member of his staff. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington," Emily replied, her voice steady despite the hurricane in her chest. He walked on toward his office, and Emily returned to her mop, counting down the days until she could finally say the words that would either reunite their family or get her killed trying. The invisible janitor saw everything, and she was done being invisible. 30 years earlier, Long Island, New York. The rain hammered against the windshield as Charlotte Harrington gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white with tension. In the rearview mirror, she could see 6-month-old Emily sleeping peacefully in her car seat, the tiny gold heart pendant catching the occasional streetlight as they drove through the storm. "We should have waited until morning," Charlotte whispered to herself, but she knew waiting wasn't an option. Victoria's threats had become too real, too dangerous, the way her sister-in-law looked at William, at the baby, at everything Charlotte held dear. It was the gaze of someone who believed she deserved it all. The brakes screamed as Charlotte tried to stop, but the car hydroplaned on the slick asphalt. The last thing she saw was the massive oak tree rushing toward them, and her final thought was a desperate prayer that Emily would survive. What Charlotte didn't see was Victoria's car parked in the shadows 50 yards back, or the way her sister-in-law smiled as the ambulance arrived. Present day, Topeka, Kansas Emily Parker, as she'd been known then, had just turned 18 when she found the adoption papers hidden in her mother Margaret's hope chest. The faded documents told a story that shattered everything she thought she knew about herself. Baby Jane Doe, approximately 6 months old, found at the scene of a fatal car accident, no living relatives located, placed for adoption through private agency. But it was the photograph tucked behind the paperwork that changed everything. A Polaroid of a tiny baby wearing half of a gold heart pendant. The same pendant Emily wore every day, the one Margaret claimed had been around her neck when they'd brought her home from the agency. Margaret Parker had been in her garden when Emily confronted her, soil-stained hands shaking as she looked at the papers her daughter held. "We couldn't have children," Margaret whispered, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "This woman came to us, said there was a baby who needed a home. She charged us everything we had, sold the farm to pay for you, Said you were from a car accident. That nobody wanted you. What woman, Mom? What was her name? Victoria something. She had a scar right here. Margaret traced a line down her left cheek. Mean eyes. But she promised you'd be safe with us. We loved you from the moment we saw you. Emily, you have to believe that. Emily had believed it. The Parkers had given her 12 years of genuine love before Margaret's cancer took her. And Emily's adoptive father drank himself to death 2 years later. But knowing she was loved didn't fill the void that had always existed. The sense that somewhere, someone was missing her, present day. Manhattan. Emily shook off the memory as she restocked her cleaning supplies in the janitor's closet. The fluorescent light flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows that reminded her of that horrible day in Kansas, when her world had imploded for the second time. Through the thin walls, she could hear Victoria's voice, sharp and commanding as always. Emily had spent months learning to identify the subtle changes in that voice. When Victoria was lying, when she was angry, when she was planning something terrible. The transfer needs to happen this week, Victoria was saying to someone, probably Thomas, based on his mumbled responses. William's getting suspicious about the medication changes. Emily pressed her ear closer to the wall. She'd installed a micro recorder behind the electrical outlet months ago, but sometimes the direct approach worked better. What if he goes to another doctor? Thomas asked. Then we accelerate the timeline. A heart attack wouldn't surprise anyone. He's been under so much stress lately. Victoria's laugh was ice cold. Poor man, working himself to death trying to keep his precious company afloat. Emily's hands clenched into fists. The stress Victoria referred to was actually Digitalis poisoning. She'd confirmed it after sneaking a sample of William's medication to a lab technician she'd bribed. The heart medication Victoria prepared for him each morning contained enough Digitalis to slowly weaken his heart over months. To everyone else, it would look like his cardiac condition was simply worsening. A soft knock on the closet door made Emily jump. She quickly grabbed a bottle of floor cleaner and opened the door to find Olivia standing there, looking concerned. Emily, are you okay? I heard voices and thought maybe... Olivia trailed off, her eyes searching Emily's face. Just talking to myself, Emily said quickly. Helps me think through my cleaning schedule. Olivia's smile was gentle but unconvinced. You know, I do that too. Sometimes out loud helps organize your thoughts better than just thinking them. She leaned against the doorframe. Can I ask you something? Emily nodded, though her heart rate spiked. Had she been too obvious in her surveillance? Had Olivia noticed something? Have you ever felt like you were meant for something bigger than where you are now? The question caught Emily completely off guard. Of all the things Olivia might have asked, this wasn't one she'd prepared for. What do you mean? I don't know. It's stupid. Olivia shook her head. I just sometimes feel like there's this piece of me missing. You know, like there's a part of my life that got lost somewhere, and I can't figure out what it is. Emily's throat went dry. Standing before her was the sister she'd never known, describing the exact feeling that had driven Emily across the country to find her family. The irony was almost too painful to bear. Maybe you're just ready for new challenges, Emily managed. Sometimes we outgrow our circumstances before we realize it. Maybe. Olivia studied Emily's face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. You remind me of someone, but I can't place who. Have we met before? Before you started working here? I mean, yes, Emily wanted to scream. We met when you were born and I was already 6 months old. We met in the hospital when Victoria was deciding which of us would be more useful to keep. I don't think so, Emily said instead. I'm from Kansas. Never been to New York before this job. Kansas. Olivia's eyes grew distant. My dad used to tell me stories about a sister I never had. Said she died when I was really little, in a car accident with our mom. Sometimes I wonder what she would have been like. Emily's vision blurred. The casual way Olivia mentioned her, the sister who died, made her want to grab the younger woman's shoulders and shout the truth. Instead, she forced herself to stay calm. I'm sure she would have loved you, Emily whispered. Dad keeps this old locket in his office safe. Half of a heart pendant. Said it belonged to her. Olivia's voice grew soft. Mom, Victoria, always changes the subject when I ask about it. Says it's too painful for Dad to discuss. Emily's hand instinctively went to her throat, where the other half of that pendant rested beneath her uniform. The broken edges would fit together perfectly, like two pieces of a puzzle that had been separated for 30 years. "That sounds like something worth holding on to," Emily said carefully. "Yeah." Olivia straightened up, shaking off the melancholy. "Sorry, I don't know why I'm telling you all this. You probably think I'm crazy. Not crazy at all. Family's complicated. Tell me about it." Olivia glanced toward Victoria's office. "Sometimes I feel like I'm living in someone else's story, you know? Like the life I'm supposed to have is somewhere else entirely." "It is," Emily thought desperately. "It's right here, standing in a janitor's closet, wearing your sister's face and waiting for the right moment to bring you home. I should let you get back to work," Olivia said. "But Emily, if you ever want to talk about Kansas or family or anything really, I'm a good listener." Emily watched her half-sister walk away, disappearing around the corner toward the elevators. The offer of friendship was genuine, as was the loneliness Emily had heard in Olivia's voice. They were both orphans, in a way. Emily, literally, and Olivia emotionally, raised by a woman incapable of real love. Victoria's voice carried through the walls again, discussing final arrangements with Thomas. Emily closed her eyes and touched the pendant through her shirt. Soon, she promised silently, soon she'd tell Olivia the truth about their mother's death, about the sister who'd never actually died, about the woman who'd raised her with lies and poison. But first, she had to save their father, the man who kept half a heart in his safe. Waiting for a daughter he'd never stopped mourning, Emily gathered her cleaning supplies and headed back into the hallway. Tonight, she'd add another piece to the evidence she'd been collecting for 2 years. Tomorrow, she'd move one step closer to the truth. The invisible janitor was about to become very visible indeed. The golden heart pendant felt warm against Emily's fingers as she held it up to the dim light of her studio apartment. Even in the darkness before dawn, she could make out the jagged edge where it had been broken, the tiny inscription barely visible after 30 years. "My heart." The other half was somewhere in William Harrington's office safe, waiting to complete a puzzle that had been torn apart the night her mother died. Emily had memorized every scratch, every imperfection in the metal. It was her talisman, her proof, her connection to a life that had been stolen from her. Margaret Parker had told her it was the only thing she'd been wearing when the adoption agency brought her to Kansas. A 6-month-old baby with no name and no past. Just this broken piece of jewelry around her tiny neck. She'd worn it every day for 23 years, never knowing it was half of a set. The alarm on her phone buzzed softly, 4:30 a.m. Time to get ready for another day of invisible surveillance. Emily tucked the pendant beneath her uniform shirt and gathered the small recording device she'd been perfecting for weeks. Today, she was finally going to plant it in Victoria's office, Harrington Corporation, 6:15 a.m. The executive floor was tomb quiet as Emily pushed her cart off the elevator. She'd timed her arrival perfectly. The night security guard would be doing his rounds on the lower floors, and the day shift wouldn't arrive for another hour. Victoria rarely appeared before 7:30, which gave Emily just enough time to install her surveillance equipment. The lock on Victoria's office was expensive, but not impossible. Emily had spent months practicing with similar models, guided by YouTube videos and a lock-picking kit she'd ordered online. The door clicked open after 90 seconds of careful manipulation. Victoria's office reeked of expensive perfume and something else, something chemical that made Emily's nose wrinkle. She moved quickly to the bookshelf where she'd spotted the perfect hiding place weeks ago, behind a thick copy of Corporate Governance. Emily attached a device no bigger than a quarter to the wooden backing. The microphone was nearly invisible, powered by a battery that would last 6 months. As she worked, Emily's eyes fell on Victoria's desk, in the top drawer, which Victoria thought she kept locked but actually left slightly ajar. Emily could see the edge of a small prescription bottle. She'd photographed it before. Digitalis tablets, prescribed to a patient named V. Harrington by a doctor, Marcus Webb, who, according to Emily's research, had died in a car accident 3 years ago. Victoria was using a dead doctor's prescription pad to obtain the poison she was feeding her husband. A sound in the hallway made Emily freeze. Footsteps, too heavy to be the security guard's soft-soled shoes. Someone was coming and they weren't supposed to be here this early. Emily quickly closed the drawer and slipped behind Victoria's desk. Crouching low as the footsteps approached, through the glass walls, she saw a figure pass by, tall, slightly stooped, moving with the careful gait she'd come to recognize. William Harrington, at 6:20 in the morning, looking like he hadn't slept. Emily watched him unlock his own office and disappear inside. A moment later, she heard the distinctive beep of a safe being opened. Her heart hammered against her ribs. He was looking at the pendant. She was sure of it, late at night or early in the morning, when the building was empty and he thought no one could see his grief. Moving carefully, Emily slipped out of Victoria's office and relocked the door. She had to see this, had to witness the father she'd never known, mourning the daughter he believed was dead. William's office was larger than Victoria's, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a stunning view of Manhattan's skyline. But William wasn't looking at the view. He sat behind his massive desk, holding something small and golden in his weathered hands. The other half of Emily's pendant, even from her position in the hallway, Emily could see how he cradled it, his thumb tracing the broken edge. His lips were moving. Was he talking to it? To her memory? Emily pressed herself against the wall, tears burning her eyes. This was her father, the man whose DNA she carried, whose eyes she'd inherited, the man who'd named her, who'd probably sung lullabies and changed diapers and planned a future that Victoria had destroyed with calculated precision. "I'm sorry, baby girl." William's voice carried through the glass, barely audible, but clear enough for Emily to hear. "I should have protected you better, should have seen what she was planning." He knew. The realization hit Emily like a physical blow. William knew, or at least suspected, that Victoria had been involved in Charlotte and Emily's deaths, but knowing and proving were two different things, especially when the person you suspected was your wife of 25 years. William closed the safe and sat back in his chair, looking every one of his 55 years. Emily could see the subtle signs of digitalis poisoning now that she knew what to look for. The slight tremor in his hands, the grayish tint to his skin, the way he pressed his palm against his chest as if his heart was skipping beats, which it probably was. The elevator dinged, and Emily quickly retreated to the janitor's closet. Through the door's crack, she watched Olivia emerge, looking as surprised to see her father as Emily had been. "Dad, you're here early." William quickly composed himself, tucking the pendant into his jacket pocket. "Couldn't sleep, thought I'd get some work done." "Are you feeling okay? You look..." Olivia paused in his doorway, concern evident in her voice. "Just tired. The quarterly reports have been keeping me up." Emily could see Olivia's expression even from her hiding spot. The young woman wasn't buying it. "Dad, when's the last time you saw Dr. Morrison for your heart?" "I mean, Victoria handles my medical appointments. She says Dr. Morrison is satisfied with my progress." "Dr. Morrison doesn't exist," Emily wanted to shout. "Victoria's been telling you he's monitoring your condition while she slowly kills you." "Maybe I should come with you next time," Olivia suggested. "I worry about you, Dad." "We all do." William's smile was tired but genuine. "You're a good daughter, Livy. Both you and Andrew are blessings I don't deserve. You have 3 children," Emily thought fiercely. 3, and the third one is standing 20 feet away, watching you slowly die while she pretends to mop floors. "I love you, Dad," Olivia said, crossing to give him a hug. "Whatever's bothering you, and don't tell me it's just work. You know you can talk to me, right?" William held his adopted daughter close, and Emily saw him glance toward the safe where he kept his real daughter's pendant. The irony was devastating. He was holding one daughter while mourning another, never knowing that all 3 of his children were alive and within reach. "I love you too, sweetheart," William whispered. "More than you'll ever know." After Olivia left for her own office, William sat alone for another 10 minutes. Emily watched him take a pill from a bottle Victoria had undoubtedly prepared, his heart medication, that was actually his death sentence. He swallowed it with coffee that probably contained additional digitalis, sealing his fate one dose at a time. The recording device in Victoria's office would capture her next conversation with Thomas. Emily's camera would document the false prescriptions and poisoned medications. Soon, she'd have enough evidence to bring the whole conspiracy crashing down. But watching William suffer, seeing the way he mourned her every morning in his empty office, Emily wondered if she was moving too slowly. How many more doses could his heart take? How much longer could she remain invisible while her father was being murdered 20 feet away? Emily touched the pendant through her shirt, feeling its familiar weight. Soon, she promised. Soon she'd walk into that office and place the two halves together, completing the heart that had been broken for 30 years. Soon she'd tell William Harrington that his baby girl had never died. She'd just been waiting for the right moment to come home. The Harrington Corporation building transformed after midnight. The polished marble floors that gleamed under fluorescent lights during the day now lay in shadow, broken only by the occasional security lamp and the red blinks of surveillance cameras. Emily had memorized every blind spot, every guard rotation, every creaking floorboard that might betray her presence. Tonight, she was hunting for proof that would either save her father's life or get her killed, trying her master key, lifted from the security office months ago and carefully duplicated, turned silently in Victoria's office lock. The recording device Emily had planted that morning was already transmitting conversations to her phone, but she needed physical evidence, something concrete that couldn't be dismissed as hearsay or denied in court. Victoria's desk drawers yielded their secrets reluctantly. The false prescription bottle was there, tucked beneath insurance forms and corporate correspondence. Emily photographed it from multiple angles, making sure the dead doctor's name and Victoria's patient information were clearly visible. Dr. Marcus Webb had been signing prescriptions from beyond the grave for 3 years now, but it was what she found in the locked filing cabinet that made her blood run cold. Hidden behind tax documents from 2019, Emily discovered a manila folder labeled Insurance Claims, Harrington Family. Inside were copies of life insurance policies, death certificates, and medical records she'd never seen before. Her mother Charlotte's death certificate listed the cause as traumatic injuries sustained in vehicular accident, but someone had made handwritten notes in the margins. Brake lines compromised, steering mechanism tampered with, investigation discontinued per family request. Victoria's handwriting. Emily would recognize those sharp, precise letters anywhere. The folder contained other documents that painted a horrifying picture of Victoria's patience and planning. Bank statements showing large cash withdrawals on specific dates. A receipt from an auto repair shop for a brake system inspection, dated 2 days before Charlotte's accident. Most damning of all, a handwritten note in Victoria's distinctive script. C. Becoming suspicious about financial discrepancies. W. Trusts her completely. Timeline must be accelerated. Baby creates complications but can be managed separately. Emily's hands shook as she photographed each document. Victoria had been embezzling from the company even before she murdered Charlotte. The car accident wasn't a crime of passion. It was a calculated business decision, with Emily herself dismissed as a complication to be managed separately. Her phone buzzed softly. The recording device in Victoria's office was picking up conversation from the adjoining conference room. Emily pulled up the app and listened through her earbuds, her blood chilling at what she heard. The Peterson investigation is getting too close. Victoria's voice was sharp with annoyance. He's been asking questions about the adoption records from 30 years ago. I thought you said those files were destroyed. Thomas Blake sounded nervous, which wasn't like him. Usually he was as cold and calculating as Victoria herself. They were, but Peterson's smart. He's been talking to people who worked at the agency back then. One of them remembers the Harrington baby case specifically. Emily's breath caught. Peterson. She'd heard that name before. A private investigator who'd been sniffing around the Harrington family history for months. She'd assumed he was working for a competitor or a journalist. But now she realized he must be investigating the adoption independently. What do you want me to do about it? Thomas asked. The same thing we did about Dr. Morrison when he started asking inconvenient questions about William's medical records. Emily's heart stopped. Dr. Morrison, William's actual cardiologist, the one Victoria claimed was monitoring his condition. Emily had tried to contact Morrison's office months ago, only to be told he died in a climbing accident in Colorado. An accident, just like Charlotte's car crash. Just like the investigation into Charlotte's death being discontinued at the family's request. That's 2 accidents, Victoria. 3 if you count Charlotte. People might start to notice a pattern. People notice what they're told to notice, Victoria replied coolly. Peterson's been having financial troubles lately, gambling debts. It wouldn't be unusual for someone like that to disappear, especially if his creditors got impatient. Emily nearly dropped her phone. They weren't just talking about scaring Peterson away. They were planning to kill him. just like they'd killed Dr. Morrison when he'd gotten suspicious about William's deteriorating condition. She had to warn him, somehow. She had to find this Peterson and tell him what he was walking into. But first, she needed to finish documenting Victoria's evidence cache. The filing cabinet's bottom drawer held medical supplies that had no business being in a corporate office. Syringes, still in their sterile packaging, vials of clear liquid labeled with medical terminology Emily didn't recognize, and most horrifying of all, a small leather journal filled with Victoria's meticulous notes about dosages, symptoms, and timelines. Day 847, subject showing expected cardiac irregularities, increased dosage to 0.3 meter and twice daily, symptoms consistent with natural progression of heart disease, no suspicion from family members. Subject: Victoria referred to her own husband as a subject in her murder experiment. Emily photographed every page, her stomach churning at the clinical detachment in Victoria's observations. The woman had been documenting William's slow death like a research project, noting his declining health with the enthusiasm of a scientist recording data. The journal's final entry was dated just yesterday. Day 9-2, subject's condition approaching critical threshold, increased digitalis concentration in morning coffee to 0.5 meter. Thomas suggests acceleration timeline due to external pressures. Peterson investigation must be resolved this week. Consider emergency protocols if subject's condition destabilizes before succession planning complete. Emily's phone buzzed again. Victoria and Thomas were still talking, but their voices were moving away from the microphone. She quickly packed the journal back exactly as she'd found it, her mind racing with implications. 912 days. Victoria had been poisoning William for nearly 3 years, carefully calibrating the dosage to mimic natural heart failure while avoiding suspicion. But now she was getting impatient. Increasing the doses to dangerous levels, Emily had to act soon, or her father would be dead within weeks. She was relocking the filing cabinet when she heard footsteps in the hallway, not the security guard's routine patrol. These were purposeful. Heading directly for Victoria's office, Emily's blood turned to ice as she realized Victoria and Thomas had finished their conference room meeting and were coming back. There was nowhere to hide. Victoria's office had glass walls on 3 sides, and the only exit was the door Emily had come through. She could hear Victoria's voice getting closer, discussing final preparations with Thomas. Emily did the only thing she could think of. She crawled under Victoria's massive desk, pulling her knees to her chest and praying they wouldn't turn on the lights. The door opened, and Emily held her breath as Victoria's designer heels clicked across the marble floor. Through the gap under the desk, she could see Victoria's legs, could smell that distinctive, expensive perfume mixed with something chemical and unpleasant. "The Peterson problem needs to be handled tomorrow," Victoria was saying. "I don't care how you do it, but make it look natural. Another climbing accident, maybe, or a mugging gone wrong. What about William? His condition is deteriorating faster than expected." "Good. The succession papers are already prepared. Once he's gone, Andrew will inherit nominal control, but the real power stays with me as executor. Everything I've worked for, finally mine." Emily bit her lip to keep from gasping. Victoria wasn't just planning to kill William. She'd been manipulating the inheritance structure to maintain control even after his death. Andrew might inherit the title, but Victoria would hold the real power. And if the daughter situation ever resurfaces... Victoria laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Emily Harrington died 30 years ago in that car crash. The baby I sold to those Kansas farmers was nobody, just another unwanted child with no legal claim to anything. Even if she somehow survived to adulthood, she has no proof of her identity." "Wrong," Emily thought fiercely, her hand instinctively going to the pendant under her shirt. "I have all the proof I need, and tomorrow you're going to find out just how wrong you are." The voices faded as Victoria and Thomas moved to the far side of the office. Emily waited until she heard them leave before crawling out from under the desk, her legs cramped and her heart hammering. She had everything she needed now. Documentation of the poisoning, proof of the murders, evidence of the adoption fraud. But she also knew Victoria was accelerating her timeline, which meant Emily was running out of time to save both her father and this Peterson investigator. As Emily slipped back into the empty hallway, she made her decision. Tomorrow, she would contact Peterson and warn him. Then she would gather every piece of evidence she'd collected over 2 years of invisible surveillance. And then, Finally, she would walk into that executive boardroom and tell her father the truth. Emily Harrington was coming home. Emily's hands trembled as she dialed the number she'd found in Peterson's online directory. It was 6:47 a.m., too early for most business calls. But if Victoria and Thomas were planning to eliminate him today, Peterson needed to know immediately. Peterson Investigations. A gravelly voice answered on the third ring. Mr. Peterson, this is going to sound crazy, but your life is in danger. Victoria Harrington is planning to have you killed today. Silence stretched for 10 seconds before Peterson spoke again, his voice sharp with attention. Who is this? Someone who's been watching the Harrington family for 2 years. Victoria and Thomas Blake discussed your murder last night. They know you've been investigating the adoption records from 30 years ago. Jesus Christ. Emily heard papers rustling. How do you know this? Because I'm the baby from those records. Emily Harrington didn't die in that car crash. Victoria sold me to a family in Kansas, and now she's slowly poisoning William while planning to eliminate anyone who gets too close to the truth. Peterson was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was deadly serious. Where can we meet? Emily gave him the address of a 24-hour diner in Queens, far from Manhattan and Victoria's surveillance network. 1 hour, I'll be wearing a blue janitor's uniform. And Mr. Peterson, don't go home. Don't go to your office and don't trust anyone. She's already killed at least 3 people to protect this secret. Harrington Corporation, 8:15 a.m. Emily pushed her cleaning cart through the executive floor with forced normalcy, but every nerve in her body was on high alert. Victoria had arrived early, which never meant anything good. Through the glass walls of her office, Emily could see her talking rapidly on the phone, her face tight with controlled fury. Don't care what it costs. Peterson disappears today, or we're all going down. Victoria's voice carried just far enough for Emily to catch fragments. Make it look random, traffic accident maybe, or a heart attack. He's the right age. Emily's blood ran cold. Victoria was giving the kill order right now, probably to some hired thug who specialized in making murders look accidental. Peterson needed to know they were already mobilizing against him. But before Emily could warn him again, her attention was caught by movement in William's office. Her father was slumped over his desk, his face gray and sweaty, one hand pressed to his chest. The morning's dose of digitalis was hitting him harder than usual. Emily abandoned all pretense and rushed to his door, knocking urgently. Mr. Harrington, are you all right? William looked up with glassy eyes, clearly struggling to focus. I'm fine. Just a little dizzy. You don't look fine. Should I call an ambulance? Emily kept her voice professional, but inside she was screaming. Victoria had increased the dosage again. William was going into cardiac distress right in front of her. No ambulances. William waved weakly. Victoria handles my medical care. She'll know what to do. Victoria is the one killing you. Emily wanted to shout. Instead, she helped him to the leather couch in his office, noting how his hands shook, and his breathing had become shallow and rapid. Let me get you some water, Emily said. But what she really did was text Peterson. Victoria escalating murder timeline. William in immediate danger. Need to move now. When she returned with the water, William was holding his chest again, his face contorted with pain. The pressure. It feels like someone's sitting on my ribs. Classic digitalis poisoning symptoms. Emily had researched them obsessively, knowing that understanding the poison was the only way to save her father. But she couldn't reveal her knowledge without blowing her cover before she was ready. Maybe you should go home early today, Emily suggested. Rest might help. Can't. Board meeting at 10. Victoria's presenting the quarterly projections. William struggled to sit up straighter. She's worked so hard on them. I can't let her down. The irony was devastating. William was worried about disappointing the woman who was systematically murdering him. Victoria had spent 25 years convincing him she was the devoted wife, the loyal partner, the loving stepmother to his adopted children. Emily heard clicking heels in the hallway and quickly resumed her janitor persona, gathering cleaning supplies as Victoria swept into William's office. Darling, you look terrible. Victoria's concern sounded genuine, but Emily could see the satisfaction in her eyes as she assessed William's deteriorating condition. Did you take your morning medication? Of course, but I'm feeling worse today. Not better. These things take time, Dr. Morrison said. We might see temporary setbacks before improvement. Victoria's lie was delivered with perfect sincerity. Why don't you let me reschedule the board meeting? You need rest. No, I can handle it. William's pride was literally killing him. But Emily understood the impulse. He'd built this company from nothing. He wasn't going to let illness stop him from leading it. Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. Of course you can. You're the strongest man I know. She turned to Emily with dismissive coldness. The office doesn't need cleaning right now, mister. Harrington needs privacy. Emily wanted to refuse, to stay and protect her father, but she couldn't break character yet. As she gathered her supplies, she caught William's eye and saw something there. A flicker of gratitude for her concern. For just a moment, she felt connected to the father she'd never known. Queen's Diner, 9:30 a.m. Peterson was exactly what Emily had expected. A rumpled man in his 50s with suspicious eyes and the weathered look of someone who'd seen too much of humanity's dark side. He'd chosen a corner booth with clear sightlines to all entrances, and his coffee cup sat untouched while his hands remained ready for quick movement. "You're younger than I expected," he said, as Emily slid into the booth across from him. "Victoria stole 30 years of my life. I'm not wasting any more time." Emily pushed a flash drive across the table. "Everything I've collected is on there. Financial records, medical evidence, recordings of her planning murders. It's enough to put her away forever." Peterson plugged the drive into his laptop, his expression growing darker as he scrolled through the files. "Holy shit. She's been documenting everything like it's a science experiment. She poisoned my mother's car to cause that crash, then sold me to cover her tracks. She's killed at least 2 other people who got suspicious. Dr. Morrison and probably others. And now she's killing my father with digitalis while planning to eliminate you. Why haven't you taken this to the police yourself?" Emily's laugh was bitter. "With what credibility? I'm a janitor with no legal identity, claiming to be someone who officially died 30 years ago. But you're a licensed investigator with legitimate standing. The police will listen to you." Peterson closed the laptop and studied her face. "You have his eyes. You know, Williams. I've been investigating this family for 8 months. Started as a missing persons case for a client who thought she might be related to the Harringtons. But the more I dug, the more convinced I became that the official story was bullshit. Your client died in a house fire last month. Another convenient accident." Peterson's jaw tightened. "Victoria's been cleaning house, eliminating anyone who might expose her. You and I are probably the only ones left who know the truth." Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the diner's aggressive air conditioning. "How many people has she killed?" "I count at least 5 over the past 30 years. Maybe more. She's patient, methodical, and she makes everything look natural." Peterson pocketed the flash drive. "But she made one mistake. She kept records of everything. This journal of hers is a prosecutor's dream. Can you stop her? With this evidence?" "Absolutely. But it'll take time to coordinate with the DA's office, get warrants issued, build an airtight case." Peterson checked his watch. "Meanwhile, your father's running out of time. You said she increased his dosage?" Emily nodded. "Based on her journal entries. He's approaching the critical threshold. Another few days of heavy doses, and his heart will give out completely. Then we need to get him away from her, today." "How?" "He trusts her completely. If I try to warn him without proof, he'll think I'm crazy. Victoria will just claim I'm some delusional employee with mental problems." Peterson was quiet for a long moment. Thinking finally, he looked up with grim determination. "Then we give him proof he can't ignore. Today's board meeting. Is it still happening?" "As far as I know." "Good. Here's what we're going to do." Peterson leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You're going to walk into that boardroom and tell them exactly who you are. Not as Emily Parker, the janitor, but as Emily Harrington, the daughter who was supposed to be dead. Victoria will deny everything. She'll call security, have me arrested for trespassing or mental disturbance. Not if I'm there with a federal warrant and enough evidence to bury her." Peterson smiled grimly. "She wants to accelerate her timeline. Fine. We'll accelerate ours too." Emily felt her heart racing. But for the first time in 2 years, it wasn't from fear. It was from hope. "You really think this will work?" "I think it's the only chance your father has. Peterson stood, throwing money on the table. Go back to work, act normal, at exactly 10:15. During that board meeting, you walk through those doors and announce who you are. I'll be waiting in the lobby with backup. As Emily watched Peterson leave, she touched the pendant beneath her uniform shirt. After 30 years of separation, she was finally going home. The only question was whether she'd be saving her father's life or walking into her own death. Either way, the invisible janitor was about to become very visible indeed. Emily's hands shook as she pushed her cleaning cart through the executive floor one final time. In 23 minutes, she would walk into that boardroom and destroy the carefully constructed lie that had defined her entire life. But first, she had to survive whatever trap Victoria was setting. The morning had an ominous quality that made Emily's skin crawl. Victoria was too calm, too controlled, moving through her pre-meeting routine with the precision of someone executing a well-rehearsed plan. Thomas Blake had arrived early and was currently locked in Victoria's office, their hushed conversation punctuated by occasional bursts of Victoria's cold laughter. Through the recording device Emily had planted, she'd caught fragments of their discussion. Containment protocols activated, and Peterson's situation resolved by noon. The private investigator had texted her 20 minutes ago to confirm he was in position with federal marshals. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria was 3 steps ahead of them all. She'd underestimated her stepmother before. Everyone had. That's how Victoria had gotten away with murder for 30 years. William's condition had worsened dramatically since Emily's encounter with him 2 hours ago. Through his office windows, she could see him struggling to review documents. His skin gray and clammy, his breathing labored. Victoria had given him an extra strong dose this morning, probably calculating that he needed to be functional enough for the board meeting, but weak enough that a sudden cardiac event wouldn't surprise anyone. Emily wanted desperately to burst into his office and tell him everything, but Peterson had been right. She needed the board meeting as her stage. With witnesses present, Victoria couldn't simply make Emily disappear or claim she was delusional. The assembled executives would hear her story, see the evidence, and most importantly, they'd witness Victoria's reaction when confronted with the truth, assuming Emily lived long enough to speak. Emily, Olivia's voice made her jump. Her half-sister stood in the hallway, looking uncharacteristically troubled. Can I talk to you for a minute? Emily followed Olivia to a quiet corner near the emergency stairwell, noting how the younger woman kept glancing around nervously. Something's wrong, Olivia said without preamble. I don't know what, but I can feel it. Mom's been acting strange all morning, and Dad looks like he's dying on his feet. He is dying, Emily wanted to say. Your mother is poisoning him, and in 18 minutes I'm going to walk into that meeting and blow your entire world apart. Strange how? Emily asked instead. She's too happy. You know how she gets when she's planning something. That fake smile. The way she moves around like she's dancing to music only she can hear. Olivia shuddered. She's been like that since yesterday. And this morning she asked me weird questions. What kind of questions? About you. Actually, she wanted to know how long we've been friends. What you've told me about your background. Whether you've ever seemed overly interested in family matters. Olivia's eyes narrowed. Why would she care about my friendship with the cleaning lady? Emily's blood turned to ice. Victoria knew somehow, despite all of Emily's careful planning and invisible surveillance, Victoria had figured out who she was. The board meeting wasn't going to be Emily's moment of triumph. It was going to be her execution. Maybe she's just worried about security, Emily managed, her mind racing. You know how paranoid executives can get. No, this was different, more personal. Olivia studied Emily's face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Emily, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Have we met before? Before you started working here? The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Emily stared into her sister's eyes that were so much like her own, like their father's, and saw recognition dawning there. Olivia was starting to piece it together. The resemblance she'd always noticed. The strange familiarity she'd felt from their first meeting. Emily began, then stopped. If Victoria knew who she was, then Olivia was in danger too. The daughter who'd been asking inconvenient questions. Showing too much interest in the sister who'd supposedly died as a baby, Victoria wouldn't hesitate to eliminate Olivia if she became a threat. Listen to me carefully, Emily said, grabbing Olivia's arms. "Something very dangerous is about to happen. When that board meeting starts, I want you to stay in your office with the door locked. Don't come out no matter what you hear, and don't trust anyone except your father. You're scaring me. What's going on?" Before Emily could answer, Andrew appeared at the end of the hallway. William's adopted son walked toward them with the entitled swagger that had always irritated Emily. But today, there was something different about his expression, something calculating and cold that reminded her uncomfortably of Victoria. "Olivia, Mom wants to see you in her office," Andrew said, his voice carrying an undertone Emily had never heard before. "Right now. I'm talking to Emily. The cleaning lady can wait." Andrew's eyes fixed on Emily with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "This is family business." "I am family," Emily wanted to shout. "I'm more family than you'll ever be." But Andrew's tone suggested he knew exactly who she was, which meant Victoria had brought him into the conspiracy. Emily felt the walls closing in around her. Victoria knew her identity, had probably known for days or weeks. The board meeting wasn't going to be Emily's revelation. It was going to be her trap. Victoria would have security waiting, lawyers present, maybe even police officers ready to arrest the delusional employee who was stalking the Harrington family. "Go," Emily whispered to Olivia. "But remember what I said. Lock your door and don't come out." Olivia looked between Emily and Andrew, clearly sensing the undercurrents of tension, but not understanding their source. "This isn't over," she told Emily. "Whatever's happening, we're going to talk about it." As the siblings walked away, Emily caught Andrew's whispered words to his sister. "She's not who you think she is, Livy. Mom's going to explain everything." Emily's phone buzzed with a text from Peterson. "Federal team in position. Proceed as planned. 10:15 sharp." But the plan had already fallen apart. Victoria wasn't going to be caught off guard. She was orchestrating her own counterattack. Emily could either run now and try to disappear again, or she could walk into that boardroom knowing it was probably a suicide mission. She thought of William, struggling to breathe at his desk while reviewing documents for a meeting that might be his last. She thought of her mother, Charlotte, dying in a car crash 30 years ago while trying to protect her baby daughter. She thought of Dr. Morrison and Peterson's client and all the other people Victoria had murdered to protect her secrets. Emily pulled the broken heart pendant from beneath her uniform shirt and held it up to the light. The jagged edges caught the fluorescent glow, a physical reminder of everything Victoria had torn apart. In 13 minutes, she would walk into that boardroom and place her half next to William's half, completing a heart that had been broken for 30 years, even if it killed her. She tucked the pendant back under her shirt and started toward the boardroom, her footsteps echoing in the marble hallway like a countdown to Judgment Day. Behind her, she could hear Victoria's voice drifting from her office, probably explaining to Olivia why the cleaning lady they'd befriended was actually a dangerous stalker who needed to be stopped. Emily wondered if Olivia would believe it, if Andrew already believed it, if William would look at her with suspicion instead of recognition when she finally told him the truth. But it didn't matter anymore. She'd spent 30 years as Emily Parker, the orphan from Kansas who'd never known her real family. Today, she was finally going to become Emily Harrington again, the daughter who'd supposedly died in that car crash, coming home at last. The boardroom doors loomed ahead, and Emily could hear voices inside. Victoria's laugh, sharp and triumphant, Thomas Blake's nervous mutter, the rustling of papers and clicking of laptops as the executives prepared for what they thought would be a routine quarterly meeting. Emily checked her watch. 10:14. Time to go home. The boardroom fell silent as Emily burst through the mahogany doors at exactly 10:15 a.m. 12 of the Harrington Corporation's most powerful executives sat frozen around the polished conference table, their quarterly reports scattered like fallen leaves. At the head of the table, William Harrington looked up from his presentation materials with confusion and growing alarm. Victoria, seated to his right, went rigid. Her perfectly composed mask slipped for just a fraction of a second, revealing something feral and dangerous underneath before snapping back into place. "Security!" Victoria called sharply, reaching for the phone. "We have an intruder!" "I am your daughter." Emily's voice cut through the room like a blade, stopping Victoria's hand mid-reach. "I am your lost daughter." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily could hear her own heartbeat, the whisper of the air conditioning, the distant hum of Manhattan traffic 42 floors below. Every eye in the room was fixed on her, but the only gaze that mattered belonged to the man at the head of the table. William Harrington stared at her with dawning recognition, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been desperate hope. What did you say? Emily pulled the broken heart pendant from beneath her uniform shirt, holding it up so the gold caught the overhead lights. Even from across the room, she could see William's sharp intake of breath as he recognized the jagged metal, the tiny inscription, the missing piece of his most treasured possession. "My name is Emily Harrington," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. 30 years ago, Victoria murdered my mother Charlotte and sold me to a family in Kansas. She told you I died in that car crash, but I didn't. I survived, and I've been working here for 2 years, watching her slowly poison you while planning to steal everything you've built. Victoria shot to her feet, her composure cracking completely. "This is insane, security. Someone call security immediately. This woman is clearly mentally disturbed. Sit down." "Victoria." William's voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried absolute authority. His eyes never left Emily's face, searching for something he'd lost 3 decades ago. "Let her speak. William, darling, you can't seriously be considering—" "I said sit down." William's tone turned ice cold, and Victoria sank back into her chair, her face white with fury. Emily walked slowly toward the table, acutely aware that several executives were recording the confrontation on their phones. Good. She wanted witnesses. She wanted the whole world to see what Victoria had done. "I have the other half," William said hoarsely, his hand moving toward his jacket pocket. "The other half of the pendant. I've carried it for 30 years. I know, I've watched you look at it. Every morning at 6:30 when you think no one can see you mourning the daughter you thought was dead." Emily's voice broke slightly. "I've been right here, Dad. I've been right here the whole time." William pulled his half of the pendant from his pocket with trembling hands. The executives leaned forward as he held it next to Emily's piece, and even in the harsh conference room lighting, everyone could see how perfectly the jagged edges aligned. "Jesus Christ," someone whispered. Victoria launched herself across the table, desperation making her reckless. "Don't you see what she's doing? She's a con artist. She researched our family, found out about the pendant, had a replica made." "William, please, you have to—" "Shut up." William's words cracked like a whip. For the first time in 30 years, he was seeing his wife clearly, not through the fog of grief and manipulation she'd wrapped around him, but as the calculating predator she'd always been. "Just shut up." Emily reached into her janitor's uniform and pulled out a small recording device. "I have proof. 2 years' worth of evidence. Recordings of Victoria planning murders. Photographs of the digitalis she's been putting in your medication. Documentation of every crime she's committed since the night she killed my mother." She pressed play, and Victoria's voice filled the boardroom with crystal clarity. "Matei Charlotte e aquela maldita criança deveria ter morrido também. Agora vou acabar com William e tudo será meu." The recording continued. Victoria's voice matter-of-factly discussing the murder of Dr. Morrison, the planned elimination of Peterson, the careful calibration of William's poisoning. With each damning word, the executives around the table looked more horrified. Victoria's face cycled through rage, panic, and finally a cold calculation that chilled Emily to the bone. Even if some of that were true, which it isn't, you have no legal standing. Emily Harrington is legally dead. You're nobody, a cleaning lady with delusions and a fake pendant. "Actually," a new voice said from the doorway, "she has every right to be here." Peterson strode into the boardroom flanked by 2 federal marshals, his face grim with satisfaction. "Victoria Harrington, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and about 6 other felonies we'll discuss downtown." Victoria's mask finally shattered completely. The composed socialite vanished, replaced by something wild and vicious. "You think you've won," she snarled at Emily. "You think you can just walk back into this family after 30 years and claim what's mine." "It was never yours," Emily said quietly. "None of it was ever yours. I earned it. I spent 25 years playing the grieving widow, the devoted stepmother, the perfect corporate wife. I earned every dollar, every share of stock, Every bit of power in this company. Victoria's voice rose to a shriek. You were nothing but a complication from the beginning. A useless baby who would have grown up to steal what I deserved. The executives around the table recoiled from the venom in her voice. Even Thomas Blake, who had sat frozen throughout the confrontation, seemed shocked by the depth of Victoria's hatred. William stood slowly, his hand pressed to his chest, but his voice steady. 25 years of lies. 25 years of mourning a daughter who was alive the whole time. 25 years of slowly dying while you watched and smiled. He looked at Victoria with something beyond hatred. A cold, terrible understanding. How long have you been poisoning me? Not long enough, apparently. Victoria spat. One of the federal marshals stepped forward with handcuffs, but Victoria suddenly lunged toward the executive kitchen attached to the boardroom. Emily saw the flash of silver as Victoria grabbed a carving knife from the catering setup. Her face twisted with murderous rage. If I can't have it all, then no one can, Victoria screamed, raising the knife as she charged toward Emily. Time slowed to a crawl. Emily saw the blade coming down, saw the 30 years of hatred and resentment focused into a single moment of violence. She tried to dodge, but Victoria was faster than her appearance suggested, driven by desperate fury. The knife was inches from Emily's chest when Olivia burst through the boardroom doors. Stop. Olivia threw herself between Victoria and Emily without hesitation, her arms spread wide to protect the sister she was finally beginning to recognize. The blade meant for Emily's heart caught Olivia in the shoulder instead, opening a deep gash that immediately began bleeding heavily. Olivia gasped and stumbled, but she didn't move away from Emily. Livy, no! William rushed toward his daughters, both of them, as the federal marshals tackled Victoria to the floor. Victoria fought like a wild animal, screaming obscenities and threats even as the handcuffs clicked into place. She's not your daughter. I'm the one who stayed. I'm the one who sacrificed everything for this family. You sacrificed nothing, Emily said, kneeling beside Olivia to press her hands against the bleeding wound. You stole everything, but you couldn't steal this. You couldn't steal the love between a father and his children. As paramedics arrived to treat Olivia's wound, Emily finally looked into her father's eyes without pretense, without the invisible barrier of her janitor's disguise. William reached out with shaking hands to touch her face, tears streaming down his cheeks. My baby girl, he whispered. My Emily. I never stopped believing you were out there somewhere. I know, Dad, Emily said, covering his hands with hers. I know. I'm home now. Around them, the boardroom erupted into chaos as executives called lawyers and reporters. Federal agents secured evidence, and paramedics worked on Olivia. But at the center of the storm, a father and daughter were finally reunited, their broken hearts made whole at last. Victoria's 30-year reign of terror was over. The emergency room at Mount Sinai Hospital buzzed with controlled chaos as medical staff worked to save Olivia's life. What had initially appeared to be a shoulder wound had proven far more serious. The knife had nicked an artery, and Olivia was losing blood faster than the paramedics had anticipated during the ambulance ride. Emily sat in the waiting area, still wearing her janitor's uniform. Now stained with her sister's blood, her hands shook as she replayed those terrible seconds when Victoria had lunged with the knife. If Olivia hadn't burst through those doors exactly when she did, she's going to be okay. William's voice was hoarse from the digitalis poisoning, but his grip on Emily's hand was strong. She has to be okay. Andrew sat across from them in stunned silence. The revelation that his cleaning lady was actually his sister, combined with the arrest of the woman who'd raised him, had left him speechless for the past 2 hours. Emily could see him struggling to process everything. The lies he'd been told, the family he'd thought he knew, the reality of who Victoria really was. I should have known, Andrew finally said, his voice barely audible. All those times she made me feel like I wasn't good enough, like I had to constantly prove myself worthy of the Harrington name. She was grooming me to be her puppet. She fooled all of us, William replied, though Emily could hear the self-recrimination in his voice. I let her into our lives. I married her. I trusted her with everything that mattered to me. Emily squeezed her father's hand. You couldn't have known. She's a psychopath. They're experts at manipulation. She spent 30 years perfecting her performance. Dr. Sarah Chen emerged from the surgical suite. her scrubs bloodied but her expression cautiously optimistic. The surgery went well. We were able to repair the damaged artery and stop the bleeding. Miss Harrington is stable, but she'll need several days of recovery. The collective sigh of relief from the Harrington family was audible. Emily felt tears streaming down her cheeks. Tears of gratitude, exhaustion, and overwhelming emotion at finally being able to call them family out loud. "Can we see her?" William asked. "She's still unconscious from the anesthesia, but you can sit with her. Fair warning, she's going to be in significant pain when she wakes up, and the psychological trauma of what happened may take longer to heal than the physical wounds." They followed Dr. Chen to Olivia's room, where their sister lay pale and still. Connected to multiple monitors and IV lines, Emily had never seen anyone look so fragile. This vibrant, caring young woman who'd shown kindness to a janitor she barely knew, who'd thrown herself in front of a knife to save someone she was just beginning to recognize as family. "Thank you," Emily whispered, taking Olivia's uninjured hand. "Thank you for saving my life." A soft knock on the door interrupted the moment. Detective Ray Martinez from the Manhattan DA's office entered, followed by Peterson. Both men looked exhausted. They'd spent the afternoon processing the massive amount of evidence Emily had collected over 2 years. "Sorry to disturb you," Martinez said, "but we need to discuss what happens next. Victoria Harrington and Thomas Blake are both in custody, but their lawyers are already working on bail arrangements." "Bail?" Andrew's voice cracked with disbelief. "She tried to murder my sister." "Sisters," Emily corrected quietly, and Andrew's expression softened with something that might have been acceptance. "The attempted murder charge is solid," Martinez continued, "but the other charges, the poisoning, the murders from 30 years ago, those are going to be harder to prosecute. We need Emily's testimony, and Victoria's lawyers are going to attack her credibility." Peterson leaned forward. "They'll argue she's an imposter, that the pendant could have been faked, that her recordings were obtained illegally. It's going to be a battle." William's jaw tightened. "What do you need from us?" "DNA evidence. For starters, we need to prove conclusively that Emily is your biological daughter. We also need medical testimony about the digitalis poisoning. Thankfully, we caught it early enough that Dr. Chen was able to confirm the presence of the drug in your bloodstream." Emily felt a chill of apprehension. What if Victoria's lawyers convince a jury that I'm just a con artist? What if they get her off? "They won't," a weak voice said from the hospital bed. Olivia's eyes were open, unfocused but determined. "Because I remember now. Livy, don't try to talk. You need to rest." William moved to her bedside, his paternal instincts overriding everything else. "No, Dad, I need to say this." Olivia's voice was barely above a whisper, but her words carried clearly through the quiet room. "I remember being little, maybe 4 or 5. Victoria thought I was napping, but I heard her on the phone. She was talking about the baby and how she'd taken care of the problem permanently. She said something about Kansas farmers and how no one would ever think to look there." Emily's breath caught. "You heard her talking about me. I didn't understand then, but I do now. She was bragging to someone about how clever she'd been." Olivia's eyes found Emily's. "I always felt like something was missing from our family, like there was an empty space where someone should have been." "That's inadmissible in court," Martinez warned. "Childhood memories from 20 years ago, overheard conversations. Defense attorneys will tear it apart, maybe in court," Peterson said grimly. "But there are other kinds of justice. The media attention alone will destroy Victoria's reputation. And Emily's story, the lost daughter returning home, that's going to capture people's imagination." Andrew had been quiet throughout the legal discussion, but now he cleared his throat. "I want to help. Whatever you need. Testimony, financial records, corporate documents. I'll provide it. Victoria manipulated me my whole life, made me complicit in things I didn't understand. I want to make that right." Emily looked at her adopted brother with new respect. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I have a confession to make." Andrew's face was flushed with shame. "This morning, Victoria told me who you really were. She said you were a dangerous imposter who was trying to steal from our family. She asked me to help her handle the situation." The room went deadly quiet. Emily felt her father's hand tighten protectively around hers. "I didn't know about the poisoning or the murders," Andrew continued quickly. I swear I didn't know about any of that, but I believed her about you being a fraud. I was jealous, I guess. The idea that Dad might have another child, a real biological child, made me feel threatened. What did she ask you to do? Detective Martinez's voice was sharp with professional interest. She wanted me to accuse you of theft, said she'd planted some of Mom's jewelry in your locker, and I should discover it and call security. Make it look like you'd been stealing from the family. Andrew's voice broke. I was going to do it right after the board meeting. I was going to destroy your life to protect my own position. Emily stared at her brother, processing this revelation. But you didn't. No. When you walked into that boardroom and I saw Dad's face, when I saw how you two looked at each other, I knew. You really are his daughter. You're my sister. Andrew wiped his eyes. I'm sorry, Emily. I'm so sorry. William looked between his children, all three of them, with an expression of profound sadness. Victoria didn't just try to kill us. She tried to turn us against each other. She wanted to make sure that even if the truth came out, we'd be too damaged to function as a family. But she failed, Olivia said weakly from her hospital bed. We're here. We're together. And we're going to make sure she pays for everything she's done. Detective Martinez closed his notebook. The preliminary hearing is scheduled for next week. Victoria's lawyers will probably argue for bail, citing her community ties and lack of flight risk. We'll oppose it, but judges can be unpredictable. She won't run, Emily said with certainty. She's too arrogant. She still thinks she can manipulate her way out of this. Peterson nodded grimly. Emily's right. Victoria spent 30 years building her perfect life. She won't abandon it without a fight. As the legal team left to continue their preparations, the Harrington family settled in for a long night at the hospital. Emily sat beside Olivia's bed, watching her sister sleep peacefully for the first time in 30 years. Andrew had claimed the uncomfortable visitor's chair, while William dozed fitfully on a small couch, his body still recovering from months of poisoning. For the first time since she'd arrived in New York, Emily felt something she'd almost forgotten how to recognize. Peace. The truth was finally out. Victoria was behind bars. Her father was alive. Her siblings were accepting her, and they were beginning the long process of healing as a family. But even in this moment of quiet triumph, Emily knew the real battle was just beginning. Victoria wouldn't go quietly, and her lawyers would use every dirty trick in the book to avoid a murder conviction. Emily touched the pendant at her throat. No longer broken, now that both halves were finally united, whatever came next, they would face it together. The Harrington family was whole again, and no amount of legal maneuvering could change that fundamental truth. Victoria had lost, even if she didn't know it yet. 6 months later, Manhattan Criminal Courthouse. The courthouse steps were packed with reporters and camera crews as Emily Harrington walked hand in hand with her father toward the imposing granite building. The media frenzy surrounding the lost heiress case had been relentless, turning what should have been a private family reunion into a public spectacle that dominated headlines for months. Victoria Harrington's murder trial begins today, read the morning's New York Times. Adopted daughter testifies against stepmother in shocking poisoning case, proclaimed the Post. Every major network had sent crews to cover what prosecutors were calling one of the most calculated and cold-blooded murder conspiracies in New York history. Emily squeezed her father's hand as they climbed the courthouse steps. Flanked by their legal team, William looked healthier than he had in years. The digitalis had been completely purged from his system, and the color had returned to his face. But the emotional scars ran deeper than any physical poison, and Emily could still see the haunted look in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. "You ready for this?" William asked as they approached the security checkpoint. "I've been ready for 30 years, Emily replied, though her stomach churned with nervous energy. Today was the day she would face Victoria in court and tell the world exactly what had been done to her family. Inside the courtroom, the gallery was packed with spectators, journalists, and court officials. Emily spotted several familiar faces: Detective Martinez, Peterson, and various Harrington Corporation executives who would testify about Victoria's financial manipulations. In the front row sat Andrew and Olivia, both looking nervous but determined to support their sister through the ordeal ahead. Olivia had recovered well from her knife wound, though she still bore a thin scar across her shoulder that would forever remind them of Victoria's final act of violence. The psychological healing had taken longer. Months of therapy to process the revelation that the woman who'd raised her was a murderer, who'd stolen her real sister and slowly poisoned their father. Victoria entered the courtroom flanked by her high-powered legal team, and Emily felt a chill at seeing her again. Prison had not been kind to her former stepmother. The perfectly coiffed socialite was gone, replaced by a haggard woman in an orange jumpsuit whose eyes burned with undiminished hatred. When Victoria's gaze fixed on Emily, her lips curved into a smile that held no warmth, only malice. Thomas Blake sat at the defendant's table beside his own lawyers, looking like a broken man. Unlike Victoria, he had accepted a plea deal in exchange for his testimony against his former lover. The weight of his choices had clearly devastated him. The confident financial advisor had become a hollow shell who couldn't meet anyone's eyes. "All rise," the bailiff called, the Honorable Judge Patricia Connolly presiding. Judge Connolly was a stern woman in her 60s with a reputation for running an efficient courtroom and showing no mercy to violent criminals. She'd been handpicked for this case because of her experience with complex murder trials and her immunity to media pressure. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Prosecutor Sarah Mitchell began in her opening statement. "Over the next several days, you will hear a story that sounds like something from a television drama. But I assure you, every word you hear will be the truth. The defendant, Victoria Harrington, committed what may be the most patient and calculating murder conspiracy in this city's history." Mitchell walked the jury through the timeline methodically. The sabotaged car crash that killed Charlotte Harrington, the theft and illegal adoption of baby Emily, the systematic poisoning of William Harrington, and the murders of anyone who got too close to the truth. The defendant didn't just steal a fortune, Mitchell concluded. She stole a family. She stole 30 years of love, of shared memories, of birthdays and holidays and bedtime stories. She turned a grieving father into her victim and made him complicit in mourning a daughter who was alive and searching for him. Victoria's defense attorney, the notorious Martin Kellerman, painted a different picture in his opening statement. He portrayed Emily as a sophisticated con artist who had researched the Harrington family obsessively and constructed an elaborate fraud to claim an inheritance she had no right to. "My client may not be perfect," Kellerman argued. "She may have made mistakes in her marriage and her business dealings, but she is not a murderer. The prosecution's case relies entirely on the testimony of a woman who cannot prove her identity and recordings that were obtained through illegal surveillance." When Emily was called to testify, the courtroom fell silent. She walked to the witness stand with her head held high, acutely aware that every eye in the room was judging her credibility. This was her moment, the chance to tell her story in her own words and demand justice for the crimes that had defined her life. Under Mitchell's careful questioning, Emily recounted her childhood in Kansas, the discovery of her adoption papers, and the 12-year search that had led her to New York. She described her 2 years working as a janitor, documenting Victoria's crimes while watching her father slowly die from poison. "Miss Harrington," Mitchell said, "can you tell the jury what it felt like to watch your father suffer while the woman who murdered your mother sat beside him, pretending to be a loving wife?" Emily's voice was steady, despite the tears in her eyes. "It felt like watching someone torture the person you love most in the world, and being powerless to stop it. Every morning, I watched Victoria prepare his medication, knowing she was adding digitalis to kill him slowly. Every night, I went home wondering if tomorrow would be the day he died while I was still invisible to him." Kellerman's cross-examination was brutal. He attacked every aspect of Emily's story, suggesting she had constructed an elaborate fraud based on public records and newspaper accounts. He questioned the authenticity of the pendant, the reliability of the recordings, and Emily's motives for infiltrating the Harrington family. "Isn't it true, Miss Parker, or whatever your real name is, that you saw an opportunity to claim a fortune by impersonating a dead child?" Emily met his gaze without flinching. "My real name is Emily Charlotte Harrington. I was born on March 15th, 1994, at Mount Sinai Hospital. My mother was Charlotte Elizabeth Harrington, and my father is William James Harrington. Victoria Harrington murdered my mother and sold me like a piece of property because she was too greedy and evil to let our family exist." The DNA evidence was conclusive. Emily was indeed William's biological daughter. The forensic analysis of the pendant showed that both halves had been broken from the same piece of jewelry at the same time. The digitalis found in William's blood matched samples taken from Victoria's hidden supply. But it was Thomas Blake's testimony that sealed Victoria's fate. Taking the stand as a broken man seeking redemption, Thomas detailed 30 years of Victoria's crimes with devastating precision. He described how she had sabotaged Charlotte's car, how she had arranged Emily's illegal adoption, how she had murdered Dr. Morrison and the private investigator who had been asking inconvenient questions. She documented everything, Thomas testified, his voice barely audible. Victoria kept journals, recordings, photographs. She was proud of what she'd done. She called it building an empire, but it was really just a 30-year killing spree when Victoria took the stand in her own defense. Emily watched the woman who had destroyed her family attempt one final performance. Victoria maintained her innocence with the same calculating charm that had fooled so many people for so long. She painted herself as a devoted wife and mother, who had been framed by a con artist and her bitter ex-lover. But the jury saw through the act. After 5 hours of deliberation, they returned with their verdict, guilty on all counts. 3 counts of first-degree murder, attempted murder, conspiracy, fraud, and a dozen other charges that would ensure Victoria never saw freedom again. Victoria Harrington, Judge Connolly said at sentencing, you have committed crimes that shock the conscience of this court and this community. You murdered a young mother and stole her child. You slowly poisoned your husband while masquerading as a loving wife. You killed anyone who threatened to expose your crimes. Victoria showed no emotion as the judge sentenced her to life in prison without the possibility of parole. But when she was led away in shackles, she turned to look at Emily one last time, her eyes burning with unrepentant hatred. This isn't over, Victoria mouthed silently. Emily smiled and touched the complete heart pendant at her throat. Yes, it is, she whispered back, outside the courthouse. The Harrington family faced a sea of reporters and camera crews. William stepped to the microphone with Emily beside him, their resemblance now obvious to everyone who looked at them. 30 years ago, I lost everything that mattered to me, William said, his voice strong despite his emotions. Today, I got my daughter back, and justice was served for the woman who tried to destroy our family. Victoria Harrington took 30 years from us, but she couldn't take our love for each other. That was always stronger than her hate. Emily leaned into the microphone. I want to thank everyone who helped bring the truth to light. My family is whole again, and that's all that matters. We're going home. As they walked away from the courthouse together, father, daughter, son, and daughter, Emily felt the weight of 30 years lifting from her shoulders. The invisible janitor was gone forever. Emily Harrington was finally home. 6 months after the trial, Christmas Eve snow fell gently outside the windows of the Harrington family estate in the Hamptons. As Emily stood in the living room, adjusting ornaments on the massive Christmas tree that dominated the space, it was her first Christmas with her real family, and she couldn't stop smiling at how natural it felt to be here, in this beautiful home that now legally belonged to her as much as it did to William, Andrew, and Olivia. The past months had been a whirlwind of change. Emily had officially changed her name back to Emily Charlotte Harrington. Honoring both her identity and her mother's memory, the legal paperwork establishing her as William's heir had been complex but straightforward. DNA evidence made her claim irrefutable, and Victoria's conviction had eliminated any challenge to Emily's rightful place in the family. Higher on the left, Olivia called from the couch, where she was wrapping presents with Andrew. The scar on her shoulder was barely visible now, but Emily still felt a pang of guilt every time she saw it. Her sister had literally taken a knife meant for her, proving that blood wasn't the only thing that made a family. I think it's perfect, William said, entering the room with a tray of hot chocolate. At 56, he looked better than he had in decades. The regular exercise and proper nutrition had restored his health completely. But more importantly, having his daughter back had given him a reason to truly live again. Emily stepped back to admire the tree, then turned to survey her family. It still felt surreal sometimes, this warm, loving scene that she'd dreamed about for so many years. Andrew had grown from the cold, entitled young man she'd first encountered into a genuine brother who'd spent months making up for his initial rejection of her. Olivia had embraced her role as Emily's closest confidant, helping her navigate the social and professional challenges of suddenly being a Harrington heiress. Dad, tell Emily about the Charlotte Foundation, Olivia prompted, settling cross-legged on the Persian rug with her hot chocolate. William's face brightened with pride. I've been meaning to discuss this with you officially. I want to establish a foundation in your mother's memory, the Charlotte Harrington Foundation for Missing and Exploited Children. With your permission, I'd like you to head it up." Emily felt tears prick her eyes. "Dad, that's beautiful, but I don't know if I'm qualified to—" "You spent 12 years searching for your family," Andrew interrupted. "You understand what it feels like to be lost, to have your identity stolen. Who better to help other families reunite? We've already received preliminary approval from the state," William continued. "The foundation will provide resources for families searching for missing children, fund DNA databases, and support legislation to prevent illegal adoptions. We're talking about a $50 million endowment to start." Emily sank into the armchair beside her father, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was proposing. "You want to turn our tragedy into something that helps others? Your mother would have wanted that," William said softly. "She always said that love should multiply, not divide. This way, her death, and your 30 years of separation, they'll mean something beyond our personal pain." The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 9 o'clock, and Emily realized it was time for the tradition she'd established over the past few months. Every Christmas Eve, she visited Charlotte's grave to bring fresh flowers and share the news of their restored family. "I'll be back in an hour," she said, gathering her coat and the bouquet of white roses she'd prepared. "Want company?" Olivia offered, but Emily shook her head. "This is something I need to do alone, but thank you." Woodlawn Cemetery, 9:30 p.m. The cemetery was quiet and peaceful under the blanket of snow, with only the soft crunch of Emily's footsteps breaking the silence. Charlotte's grave was in a beautiful section overlooking a small pond, marked by an elegant headstone that William had commissioned shortly after her death. Charlotte Harrington, beloved wife and mother, 1968-1994. Love never dies. Emily brushed the snow from the headstone and arranged the fresh roses beside the ones that were already there. William visited every week, a tradition he'd maintained for 30 years. She knelt in the snow, not caring about her expensive coat, and began to speak. "Hi, Mom. I know I've been coming here a lot lately, but tonight feels special. It's Christmas Eve, and I'm finally home with Dad and Andrew and Olivia. I think you'd like how they turned out. They're good people, despite everything Victoria did to this family." A gentle breeze stirred the snow around the headstone, and Emily smiled. "The foundation Dad wants to create in your honor is going to help so many families. Kids who were stolen like I was, parents who never stopped searching, siblings who don't even know they exist. We're going to make sure no one else goes through what we did." Emily pulled the completed heart pendant from beneath her coat, holding it up so it caught the light from the nearby street lamp. "I wanted to show you this. Dad kept his half all these years, never gave up hope that I was alive somewhere. When I held up my piece in that boardroom, I could see in his eyes that he knew immediately. Love really never dies, does it?" She tucked the pendant back under her coat and continued talking, sharing the small details of her new life that she thought Charlotte would want to know. How Andrew had taught her to sail during the summer. How Olivia had become her shopping companion and closest friend. How William had started teaching her about the business, preparing her to eventually take over the company. "Victoria's appeals keep getting denied," Emily said, her voice turning harder. "She'll spend the rest of her life in prison. And honestly, Mom, that's not enough. She stole 30 years from us. 30 Christmases, 30 birthdays, 30 years of bedtime stories and family vacations and all the little moments that make a life. But I'm trying not to let anger consume me. You wouldn't want that." Emily stood and brushed the snow from her knees, feeling the familiar peace that came from these visits. "I should get back. They're probably wondering where I am. But I wanted you to know that your little girl is okay. More than okay. I'm loved, I'm home, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure other families get the same chance we did." As she walked back toward her car, Emily felt a presence beside her, not supernatural or mystical, just the warm certainty that Charlotte's love had transcended death and guided her home, the Harrington estate. 11:15 p.m. Emily returned to find her family had moved to William's study, where a fire crackled in the massive stone fireplace. They looked up expectantly as she entered, snow still dusting her shoulders. "How was she?" William asked gently. "Proud," Emily said simply. "I think she's proud of all of us." Olivia patted the couch cushion beside her, and Emily settled in, accepting the fresh mug of hot chocolate Andrew offered her. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire dance and listening to the wind outside. "I have something for all of you," William said eventually. Reaching into his desk drawer, he pulled out 3 small jewelry boxes, each tied with a gold ribbon. "I had these made after the trial." Emily opened her box to find a beautiful gold locket engraved with her initials. Inside was a tiny photograph of Charlotte holding infant Emily, a picture she'd never seen before. Olivia and Andrew received similar lockets with family photos from before Victoria entered their lives. "So we never forget where we came from," William explained. "And so we always remember that families can survive anything if they stick together." Emily clasped the locket around her neck, feeling the weight of it settle beside her mother's pendant, 2 pieces of jewelry, 2 symbols of love that had survived decades of separation and betrayal. "I have something too," Emily said, pulling 3 wrapped packages from her purse. "They're not much, but..." William opened his to find a framed photograph of the 4 of them taken on Thanksgiving, their first holiday together as a complete family. Andrew's gift was a vintage sailing compass engraved with, "For my brother, who helped me find my way home." Olivia's present was a charm bracelet with 4 charms: a heart for love, a shield for protection, a compass for guidance, and a key for coming home. As midnight approached, they exchanged more gifts and shared stories, slowly building the foundation of memories that Victoria had tried to steal from them. Emily learned that Andrew collected vintage maps, that Olivia played piano beautifully, that William had once wanted to be a teacher before inheriting the family business, when the grandfather clock struck midnight, officially beginning Christmas Day. William raised his mug of hot chocolate in a toast. "To Charlotte, who brought us Emily. To Emily, who brought us back together. To Andrew and Olivia, who opened their hearts to a sister they'd never known. And to all the years ahead of us, when we'll create enough new memories to make up for the ones that were stolen. To family," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. "To family," they echoed outside. Snow continued to fall on the Harrington estate, blanketing the world in pristine white. Inside, a family that had been broken by hate was finally whole again, held together by love that had proven stronger than 30 years of lies and betrayal. Emily Charlotte Harrington was home at last, surrounded by the people who mattered most. The invisible janitor was gone forever, replaced by a daughter, a sister, and a woman who would spend the rest of her life helping other lost souls find their way back to where they belonged. Victoria had taken 30 years from them, but she hadn't been able to destroy the most important thing of all, their capacity to love each other, and in the end, that love had brought them home.